What is the true measure of a human life? Can you quantify its value? Distill it down to a number, a dollar amount? Many would instinctively say no, that some things are beyond price. But what if the very systems governing our societies are doing precisely that, making decisions based on calculations that put a price tag on our existence? Welcome to Stoic Pyre. Today, we're diving into a philosophical framework that profoundly shapes our world, utilitarianism. We'll explore Jeremy Bentham's radical ideas, see how they manifest in modern cost-benefit analyses, and confront the unsettling question of what happens when we attempt to assign a monetary value to human life. Prepare to challenge your intuitions and reconsider what it means to do the right thing. Our journey begins with Jeremy Bentham, an 18th century English philosopher who laid the foundation for utilitarianism. Bentham's philosophy is startling in its simplicity and profound in its implications. He posited that at our core we are driven by two fundamental forces. In his own iconic words, Bentham declared, "Nature has placed mankind under the governance of two sovereign masters, pain and pleasure." Think about that for a moment. Every action we take, every decision we make, every moral judgment, according to Bentham, stems from this primal dance between seeking pleasure and avoiding pain. It's an unyielding psychological reality, and for Bentham, it was also the bedrock of morality itself. He believed these sensations not only describe what people actually do, but also what they ought to do. This isn't just a theory of human behavior, it's a prescriptive ethical system, suggesting that the path to a moral life and a just society lies in understanding and leveraging these fundamental drivers. Building on this foundation, Bentham proposed that the highest moral principle and the ultimate goal for any legislator is to maximize what he called utility. But what exactly did he mean by utility? For Bentham, utility simply referred to whatever produces pleasure or happiness, and conversely, whatever prevents pain or suffering. The core idea is strikingly straightforward. Actions are morally right if they promote the greatest good for the greatest number of people affected by them. This isn't about individual joy in isolation, but about the aggregate happiness of all sentient beings. It's a moral arithmetic, a grand calculus where the good is the net sum of pleasure over pain. Every decision, from personal choices to national policies, ought to be weighed on this scale. The ethical imperative is to choose the path that augments overall happiness and diminishes suffering for everyone involved, pushing us towards a world where well-being is maximized for the collective. It's a powerful and compelling vision, promising a clear path to ethical decision-making. But if we're constantly measuring happiness and pain, whose happiness counts the most? And who decides what constitutes the greatest good? One of Bentham's most crucial insights, and one that often causes discomfort, concerns his view of the community. For him, a community wasn't some mystical entity with its own distinct will or spirit. Instead, Bentham famously stated that the community is a fictitious body, and its interest is simply the sum of the interests of the several members who compose it. This means there's no communal interest separate from the sum of individual interests. The public good isn't some transcendent ideal. It's merely the mathematical aggregation of what makes each person happy or avoids their suffering. This perspective is vital because it sets the stage for a quantitative approach to morality. If a community's welfare is just the sum of its parts, then decision-making becomes a matter of adding up benefits and subtracting costs across all individuals. It's a fundamentally democratic, though perhaps reductive view of collective well-being, where the individual serves as the basic unit of moral calculation, and the collective interest is simply a grand tally of these personal accounts. This idea underpins many of the economic and political decisions made today, whether we consciously recognize it or not. In the modern era, Bentham's utilitarian logic has found a powerful and pervasive application: cost-benefit analysis. Whether it's individual choices, corporate strategies, or governmental policies, the principle remains the same. Potential benefits are quantified, often in monetary terms, summed up, and then costs are subtracted to determine the action that maximizes net utility. This framework is used everywhere, from deciding where to build a new road, to setting environmental regulations, to evaluating public health programs. Imagine a city council deliberating on a new subway line. They'll calculate the economic benefits: reduced traffic, faster commutes, increased property values, and improved air quality. Then they'll weigh these against the costs: construction expenses, potential displacement of residents, and environmental disruption. The decision, from a strict utilitarian perspective, should be the one that yields the greatest net benefit for the community. It sounds rational, efficient, and objective, an ideal tool for navigating complex choices in a resource-constrained world. It promises a dispassionate mathematical approach to governance, moving beyond mere sentiment to empirical data. But can we truly quantify every aspect of human experience? What happens when human life itself enters the equation? Here's where utilitarianism, applied through strict cost-benefit analysis, can lead to deeply uncomfortable and ethically controversial outcomes. Consider corporate decision-making regarding product safety. A company might assess the cost of implementing a new safety feature versus the potential cost of lawsuits, medical expenses, and lost productivity from injuries or even deaths caused by the product. In such scenarios, human lives and injuries are implicitly or explicitly assigned specific monetary values. For instance, a famous example involved a car manufacturer who allegedly calculated that the cost of redesigning a faulty fuel tank, which could rupture in low-speed collisions, was greater than the projected cost of legal settlements for the expected number of burn injuries and fatalities. From a cold, hard utilitarian calculation, if the cost of fixing the problem outweighs the cost of the damages incurred, then fixing it is not the utility-maximizing choice. This isn't about malice. It's about following the logic of the framework to its seemingly rational yet morally chilling conclusion. It exposes a profound tension between economic efficiency and the sanctity of individual human life. The ethical objections to these outcomes are immediate and visceral. Many would argue that human life holds an intrinsic value that simply cannot be reduced to a dollar figure. To assign a monetary value to a life feels dehumanizing, a violation of fundamental human dignity. It suggests that if a life's cost is too high or its benefit too low, it might be sacrificed for the greater economic good. This clashes directly with the idea of inviolable individual rights, a concept deeply ingrained in many ethical traditions. If the utility of the many always outweighs the interests of the few, then what protections do individuals have against being instrumentalized for collective benefit? The moral outrage provoked by these cases isn't just an emotional reaction. It's a philosophical challenge to the core assumption that all values can be commensurated and aggregated. It forces us to question whether maximizing overall happiness should ever come at the explicit expense of individual lives, even in theory, and whether there are some lines that simply should not be crossed, regardless of the calculable benefits. If a government can benefit from our suffering, where does that leave our trust in the system? The implications become even more stark when we consider public finance and governmental decision-making. Strict utilitarian analysis, particularly when focused on fiscal efficiency, can identify economic benefits for governments from what appear to be profoundly negative public health outcomes. Consider, for example, the concept of premature deaths in certain public health models. While tragic on an individual level, a government might, theoretically, see a benefit from premature deaths in terms of savings on pensions, long-term health care costs, and elderly housing. This isn't to say governments actively pursue such outcomes, but the purely utilitarian lens, devoid of moral context, would highlight these economic gains. The notorious cost of smoking studies, for instance, sometimes conclude that smokers, by dying earlier, actually save the state money in the long run by not drawing on pensions and health care for as long. This kind of analysis reveals a disturbing side effect of applying a purely economic framework to human existence, where the suffering and loss of individuals are reframed as mere line items in a national balance sheet, stripping away the intrinsic human value from the equation. To truly understand the depth of Bentham's vision, we must turn to his idea of the Felicific Calculus. This was his ambitious attempt to make the quantification of pleasure and pain a scientific endeavor. Bentham believed that all aspects of pleasure and pain, including their intensity, duration, certainty, propinquity, how soon it will happen, fecundity, its tendency to produce more pleasure-pain, purity, how free it is from opposite sensations, and extent, how many people are affected, were theoretically quantifiable. He envisioned a system where we could assign numerical values to these factors, perform a calculation, and arrive at a definitive moral sum for any action or policy. Imagine a grand spreadsheet of human experience, where every joy and sorrow could be logged, measured, and compared. This calculus aimed to provide an objective, scientific basis for morality, taking it out of the realm of subjective opinion and into the domain of measurable data. It was a groundbreaking idea, offering a seemingly foolproof method to determine the right action by simply doing the math. The appeal of such objectivity in complex moral dilemmas is undeniable. But can the rich tapestry of human emotions and experiences truly be reduced to a series of numbers in a felicific spreadsheet? The utilitarian framework, particularly when strictly applied, implies a significant philosophical commitment that individual interests are fundamentally subsumed within the broader interest of the community. This means that an action's morality isn't judged by its impact on a single person, but by its overall contribution to the collective sum of happiness. If an individual detriment or even sacrifice leads to a substantially greater overall benefit for the many, then by pure utilitarian logic, that action could be deemed moral. This creates a profound tension with individual rights and liberties, which many consider to be foundational to justice. Where does the line get drawn? Is it acceptable to cause severe harm to a few if it prevents slightly less severe harm to many, or generates a huge amount of pleasure for the majority? This isn't a hypothetical question. It's a dilemma that plays out in various forms in public policy, from vaccine mandates to resource allocation in healthcare to environmental regulations that may impact certain communities disproportionately for the greater good. It challenges us to weigh the sanctity of the individual against the demands of the collective, forcing us to confront the very nature of justice itself. This leads us to a crucial philosophical crossroads. While the goal of maximizing overall well-being is intuitively appealing, the practical application of utilitarianism, especially when it involves putting a price tag on life, highlights its profound ethical limitations and generates intense moral discomfort. It raises critical questions. Are all pleasures and pains truly commensurable? Can we quantify values like dignity, freedom, and love? And what happens to individual rights when they conflict with the collective good? The cases we've discussed today, from corporate safety decisions to governmental assessments of public health, are not mere theoretical exercises. They represent real-world instances where the logic of maximizing utility has led to outcomes that many find deeply troubling. This isn't about rejecting the pursuit of happiness or efficiency entirely, but about recognizing that some values may simply transcend quantitative analysis. It demands that we consider whether there are certain moral absolutes, certain rights or dignities that should never be sacrificed, no matter how great the potential aggregate benefit. The tension between utility and rights remains one of the most enduring debates in moral philosophy. So, what truly is the right thing to do when the cost of life enters the equation, and who gets to decide? Bentham's utilitarianism, despite its controversies, has had an undeniable and enduring legacy. It shifted ethical thought towards consequences, towards measurable outcomes, and away from abstract moral rules or divine commands. It's a philosophy born of an age of scientific progress, attempting to bring rationality and empirical rigor to the messy world of human morality. Modern economics, public policy, and even legal systems are deeply indebted to its principles of efficiency and welfare maximization. However, as we've explored, its raw application can also strip away the very essence of what it means to be human, the qualitative, the unquantifiable, the inherent worth of each individual. As citizens in a world increasingly driven by data and cost-benefit analyses, it becomes our responsibility to critically examine these underlying frameworks, to understand the why behind the policies that shape our lives, and to advocate for a vision of justice that acknowledges both the collective good and the inviolable dignity of every single person. The challenge isn't to dismiss utilitarianism entirely, but to understand its power and its pitfalls, and to integrate it thoughtfully with other ethical considerations. Today, we've wrestled with Bentham's provocative idea that pain and pleasure govern all, and how this translates into the challenging world of cost-benefit analysis. We've seen how putting a price tag on life can lead to ethically thorny dilemmas, forcing us to confront the limits of purely quantitative morality. What are your thoughts on utilitarianism? Are there some values that should always remain beyond quantification? Share your perspective in the comments below. If this discussion sparked new ideas for you, please like this video, subscribe to Stoic Pyre for more philosophical explorations, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next deep dive. Until next time, keep questioning, keep reflecting, and strive for a life well examined.